Well, congratulations then that you were able to go.
Well, it is what it is.
That's exciting though, to be able to
Well,
do that.
yeah, well, you'll get there someday in about 80 years.
Hopefully not that many, Dick.
That's right. Keegan Douglas is,
Keegan is with Gina.
okay, great. Hi, Keegan.
So we start the recording.
All right. Yeah, it looks like we just make it a quorum here. I know David is out of the country,
Oh, great.
so he sent his apologies. But he did send some comments on where one of the first things we're gonna do is, talk a little bit about the norms. Julie had some ideas there. And
Oh,
so
great.
anyway, okay, we'll call the meeting to order at 6:30.
Be right up here. Okay, thank you.
All right, first item is public comment. It doesn't appear to be much public. Bob, you want to comment?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, good. Bob is going to be a busy man, helping with a lot of communications this summer. I have a feeling. So, okay. So the norms. Now last time around it was Julie's good suggestion. We really should look at the norms. I actually do have a comment from David on the norms, but and I just got two comments. Julie had a comment and David had a comment. But we kind of have everybody have the norms in front of them?
Yeah.
Okay. I'll just start off with, I'll actually let Julie start. Or do you want me to read your comment?
Sorry, I was muted. Yeah, it wasn't big. It was just that I think my comment was that we would focus on student outcomes and opportunities while being mindful of the cost to taxpayers.
Yep. And you said in areas of both academic and social emotional learning, which I thought was good too.
Yep. Sorry.
So I
Yep.
like that because we're really not focusing. We never made a statement on being very student centered.
Can you just read that one more time so that Don has it?
Okay, we will focus on increasing student outcomes and opportunities in areas of both academic and social emotional learning while being mindful of cost to taxpayers.
I've written down, Jim.
Yep.
Do we really want cost to taxpayers or cost to our constituents, which includes taxpayers, but it also encompasses the students themselves, the faculty, the staff. I mean, I think it's appropriate to focus on our mission of making ourselves mindful of the costs and benefits to taxpayers.
How about community? Communities.
That works for me. I don't mind the other. It's just it eliminates anybody who happens not to be
A property owner.
taxpayer.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, okay, so cost to our communities. We could make it. Yeah, I like that a lot just because our current norms are very much focused on having good meetings. That really misses out on the fundamental item. Now, David, he included something that is also a focus of ours, but doesn't show up here. I think it does maybe at TNG.
Jim, I'm having a lot of trouble. I can hear
Right.
Julie just fine, but you're
Okay.
just soft enough so that my humble ears don't quite catch everything you say.
Okay, where is our? If I speak up, is that better?
A little bit. It's go ahead. I mean,
Okay.
I have a
David's comment. He had actually 2 points. One was essentially we will be informed on legislative issues, which I think is has been a focus of ours and I think is an important one. And the other one is a little bit more the individual districts, but we will work to be in close contact with our stakeholders.
That was that was pretty much Julie's. Um, I mean, it's more encompassing, but I'm not sure as a goal how that would play out in reality. I mean,
Well, I think, there's, when I thought of that, I thought of one, it's actually the SU, to some extent, the SU stakeholders are the districts. Even though we also, and typically, I think a lot of the community outreach goes through the districts, not so much through the SU. So I'm sure whether that would make perfect sense for us to include, because it sort of puts the onus on us to communicate, out to the world more. And honestly, I think we've done that a bit, but we've really done it in conjunction with districts.
How's the audio now, Dick?
I didn't quite hear that.
How is the audio? Well, I guess that's the answer.
I don't know how to adjust my thing so that it picks up. If I were using a sound analogy, I can hear you at 17, but you're playing at 15.
Okay, can we check with everyone else? How's the audio for other people? We're trying to figure out if it's a specific issue to Dick or if it's organizational. Okay.
So you may need to turn
Everyone
the
else is
volume
okay.
up. Turn your volume up, maybe.
I'll try.
Okay. All right, so we're just
Julie.
gonna keep
Can
going.
I- yeah.
Someone else.
Just I think I really like that concept, but I also think that I completely agree with Dick's point. Like, MetaWe has be responsive and responsible to our community. I don't know exactly what TNG says, but I recall you have something about stakeholders in some capacity. I don't know where Winhall lands, but I'm struggling to see where BRSU, as the organization that the BRSU is, does that separate from the districts.
Yeah, I think, well, we serve the districts. That's the primary focus of the BRSU, provide. So to some extent, I think that our communities look to our school districts they look to our school districts, and the BRSU is just something that gets allocated at budget time historically.
I'm just wondering if there's something here though, because I do know that there is like a disconnect where people feel often like the districts are suffocated by the BRSU. Like everything is like whatever the BRSU brings down on us kind of attitude. So I'm wondering if there's something in here we can pull out.
It's a good point. Yeah,
I wonder. Dean made a point in one of our Thursday sessions that the reason the RSU works is that we allow the districts to relate to the slightly different mission and communities that are encompassed by our three separate districts. I mean, a community outreach to Wyndham, for example, their mission of making sure that their kids are given maximum school choice within a good framework of private as well as public school choice or independent school choice. And Dean spent a lot of time, and you can talk on this, Dean, a little bit, but spent a lot of time saying that he has to bridge the gap.
Right.
We have school choice, which we support in the BRSU, and obviously support anybody needing special education. It's vastly different in terms of the way that it operates than MetaWe, which is slightly different because of its mission and ideal than the Taconic and Green.
Well, yeah, Julie, good. You're on mute.
Sorry, I was trying to type what I was thinking while everything else was happening. What if it was something like we will facilitate stakeholder engagement through each of our independent districts, through services provided to each of our independent districts?
Well, I was kind of thinking maybe of taking this in a different direction, just asking a question. In that, do you think right now we have, the BRSU board is made up of representatives of each of our individual boards? And at this point, does that structure in and of itself provide sufficient understanding at the individual districts of what the SU is doing? I'm just kind of wondering, because we, to some extent, it's like, if you, Julie and Jenna, or you go filling your boards in on what the SU is doing, and I would, I think that doesn't happen as much, and I'm not sure whether that's something that we should be trying to fill, rather than just expecting all of our board members to go back and, update.
I think
Yeah.
Randall does a fabulous job of that.
Yeah, I feel like it's implicit. I feel like that statement doesn't need to be added to the norms because it's implicit in the existence of the board itself. I think based on the conversation that you guys just had, the only edit I would make to Julie's language is the swap from taxpayer to community, like we discussed. I think that's a great change, and I think leave it as is. I don't know that we need any more language than that.
So maybe we don't need to, at this point, do the stakeholder sort of thing.
Yeah, at the end. The
We can
second
just
one to do.
kind of leave that out for the.
Yeah, I think that's implied that if we're doing our job as a board, we're already doing that.
And
So
I
we
think
have-
that this is a good conversation to have, and then the people that are members of each district have this fresh in our minds, and maybe we adjust our own norms to emphasize what we want to emphasize.
Okay, sounds good. So we have essentially at this point 2 points to add, one on student outcomes and opportunities, the other one on legislative issues. I don't know whether it needs to go beyond we will be informed on legislative issues to, probably not. Yeah, that's adequate. What do you guys think?
Yeah, maybe stay informed instead of
That's
be.
exactly what I was going to suggest. We will stay informed.
Okay. Jenna, Kelsey, what do you guys think? You good? Okay.
Do we need a motion to make the 2 changes?
Yeah, why don't I read them out first, and then you can make a motion based on that. So,
Or you could make the motion and in the process of making the motion, state it, and then one or all of us can second it.
okay, can I do motions as chair? Yes.
Yes, you can.
Okay. Robert's rules, got to take there. Okay, good. Okay, so I'll make a motion that we make 2 additions to the norms, the BRC board norms. The first one is we will focus on increasing student outcomes and opportunities in areas of both academic and social emotional learning, while being mindful of costs to our communities. The second one is we will stay informed on legislative issues.
I'll second that.
Oh, okay.
Okay?
Oh, Dick can have it. You can have it, Dick.
No,
Dick
you-
can have a second. Okay, any further discussion? All in favor, please raise your hands. Makes it easier to say. Okay, great. That's unanimous. Yep. Okay, of course, that's my agenda too. But
Should we, based on your previous comment, include it in the agendas for each of the separate districts that we've changed our norms.
Pardon me? Sorry.
Should we ask that the agendas of the districts, that's the three districts, have this change in norms included in a packet for information, or just
Well,
no need for an action? We took the action.
you guys can let them know or whatever. We can point it out, but
Okay.
yeah, I wouldn't want to impose on the other agendas. Yeah. I think we can kind of report out. It isn't going to be. I don't think it's going to be mind bending or anything for anybody that we're doing that. Okay, so next, the consent agenda. We've got 2 items on here, the minutes of May 27th and hiring. Anybody have any issues with those both being in the consent agenda? Then do we have a motion for the consent agenda? Julie makes a motion, second by Kelsey, got there first.
I guess it's going to pass.
Okay. All in favor, raise your hand. Great, that's unanimous. Okay, next is the report of the superintendent.
Yes, it is. So we've already gone over this at all of the other board meetings this month, but I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. Said this before, I feel really, really proud and good about the work that's happened across our system. We're really seeing the impact of the changes we've made on student growth and student performance. And it's exciting to see some of the outcomes that we're seeing this spring. So I'm feeling good about that. We've had lots. I think it was really struck. I'll just give Bob a shout out. It's really great to see all of the many, many ways that we are highlighted and celebrated in the news for the great work happening in our schools. There are so many different interesting and unique experiences and opportunities we do provide our students. And, whether it's a big thing or a small thing, we see our kids learning and having really interesting and meaningful experiences that vary across our schools. So it's pretty cool. So.
Well, and just a suggestion, if you're on Facebook and you see some of those stories, remember to like and share, because it's really a good way to extend the reach of those things.
Any questions or comments for anybody?
Other than a motion to abandon the state and preserve our own independent school organization, no.
We're getting to that in a little bit. Yeah, the next item, just to kind of remind everybody that the evaluation committee of the BRSU that's tasked with providing an evaluation on an annual basis on behalf of our board and communicating out to the other boards, that committee is made up of Julie, Dean, and myself. We had some discussions earlier this year, and I kind of flagged in a previous meeting that we decided we wanted to take a look at our process. Our process we approved back in like 2021. A new process that each year includes a survey of either employees within the district or of school board members, plus each year a goal setting by the superintendent and a reflection on the prior year's goals and accomplishments with respect to those goals. That's been working pretty well. One of the things that wasn't working as well is we used from the Association of Superintendents, the National Association, we tried using the questions that they had suggested as far as, how do you tell if the superintendent is doing a good job? And we had largely used those in the surveys, and we had a lot of people saying, huh, wait, I'm not sure this pertains to me, etc. We did our best, but we thought, okay, it's time to kick the tires again. And, on that, the VSBA has a service that they provide to districts at that essentially it's a good, we set it up as we want to kick the tires on our process, so we provided them with our process. They have sort of a standard process that does go out to, it doesn't go out broadly, it goes out largely to sort of senior people within the district as a survey. It does get into the goal setting process. But the process they have is set out in the superintendent evaluation service agreement in your package. And we thought it was a good idea. We talked to them, we've got them essentially, set to do this for us. The cost is $2,000. And so essentially the evaluation committee thought it would make sense to do this year and use this as a springboard to kind of see what we can learn from this as far as maybe refining our evaluation process going forward. It would be Sandra Cameron from the VSBA doing the work. At the end, they provide a written product of what their findings were. Randy is already, she's fully tied into the process and is good with it. So this is what we're proposing. I don't know, Dean and Julie, want to add anything to that?
I mean, I would just echo what you said about where we think the value is in having an outside third party come in and give us a little bit of perspective, especially a third party that does these sort of reviews for other districts and other supervisory unions as well. So I think it can give us some really valuable context and a fresh perspective. I don't necessarily think we've been doing a poor job on it. I think we've been doing the best we can. And I think there are a lot of elements that are working in what we're doing, but it would be nice to see what a fresh set of eyes, and a different perspective would come back with.
Do we need a motion to accept the proposal of the evaluation committee to spend $2,000 in the vehicle that was just outlined?
Yeah, and to authorize the chair to sign the.
Yes.
Yeah. The only other thing that I would say is I actually I see a potential future where we take this and what we've already done and actually make something that still is our own.
Yeah, I think that, that is, I guess, my thought on this is after we finish this up, then we get together as evaluation committee again and say, okay, should we, one interesting thing we provided, it's like a 2-page memo that's our evaluation process, and sent that off to Sandra, and she said, oh, gee, not many people have this in writing. So, it's we at least we thought about it enough and got it approved by the board. But, as with every sort of process, the superintendent evaluation is one of the more important things that the SU board does. And I think that next year we also have a contract coming up next June. So, this is a good time to do it and look at the process and determine whether or not we should do some tweaks. So I would think that after we do this process, I wholly expect to ask the VSBA to give us their comments and suggestions. And then the evaluation committee gets together and we may be proposing something new, some changes.
Randy, do you see this as an affirmation of the incredible job you've done by an independent agent that rises above um, the previous evaluations, which have largely been internal and therefore applicable to any change that might be foisted on you, requiring you to seek other employment?
I don't think I understand what you're asking.
Well, it's an
Does it view
independent,
this positively, or does this make you want to leave?
yeah,
Oh,
but
uh,
it adds, because they're going to find that we probably have the person who ought to be superintendent of the entire state of Vermont, if they're right, and that would be a substantial feather in your cap.
I don't, I don't, I guess I don't think about it that way at all. I want to do the best job that I can. It's incredibly complex work, as we all know, especially right now. Um, and I have appreciated and valued the feedback that the board has given me up until this point. Um, and many districts do not have a process that's well articulated and followed like we do. So that's part of why my understanding was VSBA took this on, was because they were hearing that boards and superintendents were sort of lost. So
Okay,
we are in a different situation. I believe that probably that what I care about is doing the best job I can in this work, right? Continuing to
right.
learn, continuing to grow, continuing to do the best I can for this community. And so wherever we are on the other side, I look forward to a conversation with the committee and with the board around what did we find from this process,
Okay,
and how does it compare to what we've had before, and how useful is it? I think that it's going to be a journey. I appreciate you thinking I do a good job. I certainly do the best that I can, and we'll see how it all comes out. It's always a vulnerable spot, right? I don't think anybody who's being evaluated by 9 people and then somebody else is going to feel like it's a walk in the park, right? I take it all very seriously. It's a big deal to me, but I welcome any feedback that comes my way.
okay, thank you.
Yeah, I think we also, since I brought up the negotiations, I think we've had we've obviously it's been a good two-way relationship for quite a while. Randy and she's already kind of kicked around a couple of ideas for future contracts and stuff like that. So I think, there are no guarantees anywhere in life here, but I think we're in a position where I think we've had a good two-way relationship, and that continues, which puts us in a good place for, we've been happy with her services, and she's been relatively happy with the way our districts have supported her and operated. Okay, so that motion yeah. Julie just made the motion?
No, Dick, go.
Go, Dick.
Oh,
Go, Dick, go.
I move that the BRSU formally adopt and empower the evaluation technique as recommended in the packet, and that the BRSU further authorizes the expenditure of $2,000 to accomplish the evaluation.
Okay, do I have a second? Second by Julie. Any further discussion? All in favor? Please raise your hand. There we go, unanimous. All right. Now, luckily we don't have a lot on our plate at the moment, but the big item on the plate is obviously just what happened in Montpelier. And wanted to kind of discuss that with all you guys. I do too much talking, and I'd rather have more discussion to the extent possible. Had some materials in the packet. I have some ideas, just to kind of, up front, now we do have a bill that's been passed and the governor has maybe signed or kind of signed. We now know where this came out. I have full expectation that it is going to morph over time somewhat as the complications of trying to actually put this in place become more apparent. And I think it's going to be really important that our districts continue to be engaged with this. Just kind of upfront, you look at the summary and all that. I think that article from 7 Days did a nice job of actually, explaining in real language what's happening, what the impacts are. But I think from our perspective, we have to keep in mind that school redistricting task force is supposed to be starting its activities in August. The voting ward working group starts in October. Both of those groups are supposed to have finished their work and provided written reports on, new districts and, well, actually, the districts are the key one, by December 1st of this year. Now, that includes also the Commission on the Future of Public Education. They kind of had their charge changed in this bill. And going to,
Didn't two people just resign from that committee too?
I was just about to get it there, yes.
Who resigned?
The VSBA's representative, Nicole Mace, who used to be the VSBA executive director and works for Wadowski, she has resigned. The Megan Roy, the chair of the group, has resigned. And I think I heard that one other person has resigned, but I'm not sure who. I'm not sure. Basically, everybody resigning is saying, this is not what I signed up for. And, it's been sort of, it's been overtaken by politics and unpleasant sort of activities. The commission is charged with, also by December 1st, coming up with necessary updates to roles and responsibility of school district boards and the electorate, and also trying to figure out how communities around with a restructuring, how are communities going to still have a local voice? Those are big items, and with everybody quitting, it'll be really interesting to see how that plays out. But we have a lot coming down. We also have the State Board of Education. Ding ding. The State Board of Education is also, tasked with providing a lot of things in December as well, including how do you define districts that are too small by necessity versus too small by choice, sparsity by choice versus by things that factor into the foundation formula. We have a boatload of stuff that's going to be coming down in December. And the biggest item being the commission or the redistricting task force, which they are, as per H454, they are only required to have 2 public meetings. Group that starts their work in August, and then by December is supposed to have answers of 3 different district maps, and they only have to have, they are supposed to be working closely with the commission where everybody's quitting, So it'll be an interesting process. I just think we need to, I'll shut up now a little bit. Your questions on, different elements of this or not, but I think we're gonna want to be very active in planning for how we can have an impact on that redistricting task force. And that probably includes discussions with some of our neighbors, which we've already done some of. So what do you guys, y'all shut up for a minute. Yeah. Julie.
So I guess I would like to express, first of all, my disappointment in the fact that instead of pausing and reflecting and taking stock of the work that has been done and then needs to continue and then working on it in the next part of the biennium, we rushed through something that didn't need to be rushed through. I think what we've provided is an opportunity for the state to spend $500,000 and still take one of the many available off ramps that they've installed in this bill because they understand it's a shit bill to begin with. Pardon my French.
They're spending a lot more than $500,000. They're actually like 3 or 4 million allocated for all this stuff.
So several million. But I want to be clear that I was very vocal with the representative that I know the most. And while I don't think I swayed him in his vote, I do think that I will acknowledge that he contacted me along the way, that he called me before he voted, and that he showed his face to me the day after and told me that he would get me any information that I needed for us to participate in these public meetings that are going to be held. And he has told me that in the next biennium, he would like for us to testify and he will facilitate that in any way that he can.
And that's Chris?
That's Chris.
Yep.
So we do have that going for us, but I have concerns that you have now a commission that is looking at this through a very specific lens, and that lens is designed to produce an outcome that is not going to work for the majority of the state of Vermont. And it's just an opportunity to waste money and do nothing. So I think that we all need to continue to stay involved. I think that Jim's point that we need to continue to talk to our neighbors is a really good one. And I actually would like to suggest that we have, at some point in the next few weeks, another Thursday roundup where we can really kind of discuss what those next steps might look like, because I think we're going to have to do that this summer.
Yep. Other thoughts? Yeah, go ahead.
So I hearken back to a point that Dean has been making since the governor made his first proposals. In what is transpiring, these committees have to prioritize what they really want to accomplish. And Dean focused on what do you want to accomplish and what level of financial acuity and practicality exists to facilitate the positive outcome that you now have identified. That isn't in this process at all. From my perspective, you got a bunch of people drawing lines who are drawing lines. You got a bunch of people who are outlining a fiduciary responsibility with the basic formula that are not tying any of that to the goals of positive, greater equity, educational, social, and emotional outcomes. If we're going to lobby anything, we got to argue that these committees need to work really closely together and be given a lot of direction with respect to what are the bottom line goals that we're trying to achieve, and which ones need to be modified from the quote legislative agenda and goal setting that would facilitate that. It isn't there. And I didn't think that the governor had signed the bill yet.
I don't think so, but just to put I think again, we need to, Julie mentioned having Chris Pritchard. I think we have other legislators in our area who would be supportive of our efforts as well, and I think we should be using those. And I think to me, you've got the two biggest elements to this, the foundation formula, so how we fund it. That's one element, but that can sort of be divorced from the redistricting and the, creating the new school districts, which is what actually scares the living crap out of me, because right now you have a group of 11 people who are coming together. 6 of them are legislators, 3 senators and 3 House members. The other 5 are people who had, worked in, either superintendents or school board or school business managers from the past who are appointed by legislators.
Right.
So this is, I think we saw with H454 when it went to, when somebody wants the bill to focus on certain things, they have the ability to drive it that direction. And I think things like the, currently, and this to kind of give you one little bit, when H454 came out of the conference committee, at first it was just about ready to be signed off on by the conference committee. It was actually VSBA who pointed out that the language had changed from on that. The language is now that that to the extent possible, sort of, you'll have districts that are between 4,000 and 8,000, and in the between an earlier version and the version that was just about ready to be proposed to be signed, that to the extent possible had disappeared. The language had become, it'll be between, minimum of 4,000 and maximum of 8,000. The VSBA actually pointed that out, and the VSA pointed it out, and that language got changed, like with a, oh, whoops. So I think, our ability to trust people to do the right thing without having their feet held to the fire, I don't think we can have a lot of that trust. Yeah.
So I just have, oh, Jean, do you want to jump in and then I'll go after you?
No, go ahead. I'll
Okay.
go last.
I just have a couple of comments that I think that it would, since we do have a little bit of time here, it would make sense potentially to anchor this discussion for us as a SU board to what specifically we are most concerned about and why, and to make sure that we are clear together and collectively on those issues. Because I'm not entirely sure that I'm really clear what people are most concerned about, and I think having a conversation with us is important.
Yeah.
I want to just, I guess, share two things with you that are relevant. And Sue and I, Sue, I'm going to explain this. If I mess it up, please jump in and correct me. If you look at page 19, you look at package page 19, you will see at about 3/4 of the way down, it says tuition transition. That's one of the underlined headings. Are folks there? Do you see that? Okay. So what I want you to see here is that it says we are required, all 3 of our districts, to pay tuition on behalf of resident students enrolled for last school year or who have been accepted for enrollment by the 25-26 school year by approved independent schools subject to this provision in effect on June 30th, 2025 until students have graduated. That's great. Except what I can say to you, and we have communicated both with VSBA and VSA and with the AOE directly about this, we have a lot of students who are not enrolled by June 30th, who at independent schools. So I need to know, we need to know, we have to communicate with families. Hey, this new legislation just went into effect. If your kid is not enrolled by June 30th, we're not paying for them for the, we're not paying for the out of state or like all of the provisions that people won't be in the future. We said to the AOE, we expect you to help facilitate communication around this. We're not entirely sure what we're supposed to say. And we now have a week, right? So that's relevant because you should know as an SU board and for your member, the districts, that we are going to begin to see an impact and feel an impact immediately as it relates to this. So I'm not sure what they're going to do. The governor hasn't even signed it, right? So what can they do?
It's not law yet.
And it's not signed. It is enrolled by June 30th. No families know that, right? So you understand that issue. The other issue that I am also going to be meeting with Dr. Tammy Colby about is something that I am confused about as it relates to the weights and as it relates to low spending districts. And I'm going to try to give you a very concrete example as board members because I don't have my head wrapped around what went into calculations. But every district in the state has, I'll just say arbitrarily, a poverty count, right? A certain percentage of students eligible for additional funding through federal funds, Title I eligible federal funds to support students who are economically disadvantaged, okay? So if there is a current district that has a high poverty count, they receive a significant amount of Title I funds that directly go to providing services and programming, essentially staff, for academic and social emotional supports for those higher, more economically disadvantaged communities. So my question was, all right, so when we look at a school that is identified right now as low spending, as being eligible for greater weights and increased tax rates because they have been locally funded at a lower rate, are we essentially sort of double counting? Are they getting these extra weights and they're getting this title funds? Maybe at the end of the day, the total spending maybe not be that different district to district, because when you take local spending plus the grant funds, the total spending may not be as disparate as what it looks like now when we're only comparing local budget to local budget. So I emailed Dr. Colby and she and I had some communication. We're scheduling a meeting because I wonder if in some way we're missing the mark a little bit on what's happening here. And that I'm hoping isn't true, but
it makes a
I
whole lot
want
of
you to
sense.
understand that some of the foundational principles that we're operating on, I just said I don't understand how Title I allocations were factored into the weights. And, when we're comparing locally, right, local budget to local budget, it doesn't at all involve anybody's additional CFP, Consolidated Federal Programs, grant dollars. So we're working on that too, and I think that it's important that you as a board understand some of my concerns in the spirit of what are some areas that we really want to make sure are accurate. And in both of these issues, one is more directly related to us, one is more systemic about the bill, but I wanted to just share.
I think that's important. If you think about our budgets end up showing, what are we spending locally, and then there's a whole separate section for the Title I and CFB and all the other grant funding, which then doesn't factor into our total tax burden.
Right.
So we end up, that's what, we're thinking about our neighbors down in Bennington County show up as some of the lowest spending, but they have a larger proportion of their total spending for the year coming from those Title I and other funds. So that doesn't mean they're not, in the end, not spending it on kids, they're just not charging their taxpayers for it because they've got federal funds. That's a really important point that Randy's, just.
To tie what you and Randy, you Jim and Randy, what you guys just said together, my greatest concern looking at everything that we have in front of us now is that there are an awful lot of assumptions being treated as facts in this bill, like on both the funding formula side and the operational side, the reorganizing district side, right? Like there seems to be a fundamental assumption that a larger district is more cost effective, but none of the work that went into any of these proposed bills, any of the work product that came out of these negotiations demonstrates that that's actually true in any given specific case. Like no one sat down and modeled anything and said, "Oh, look, here's the perfect example of how we can save money by making a 8,000 student district." Like that's all poof, that's nothing. That's speculation. That's one assumption. And then what Randy just pointed out about the uh, pupil weights, there's a fundamental assumption that the pupil weights are correct in the foundation formula as it exists right now, and that's going to allow you to build a foundation for funding. And I don't necessarily think that's true either. And while I do think that the foundation formula, it seems to me that quite a bit more work has gone into finding the evidence to support that argument. There seems to be a lot more data behind the foundation formula than behind the redistricting aspect of it. I think there are still problems. So I would say if we're going to focus on stuff as a board, I would want us to focus on the real life, on the ground, practical impacts of the things that are being proposed. And that should be the framework through which we present these ideas to our communities, because that's how they're going to understand it. So, this is hypothetical, but I'm just saying if the proposal was this big, this 8,000 student district for us, and we were looking at sending kids to school in Bennington or Rutland, like we need to be very specific about what that looks like, so we can articulate where the problems are. So I mean that's where my focus would be, on the real life, on the ground, what this actually physically looks like and what it actually costs.
But that means governance as well as funding formula.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think a thing that is I don't have my head wrapped around is the homestead, non-homes, like all that. The differences there are the differences that people are going to feel.
Right.
And that I think we need to really wrap our heads around a little bit better than we ever have, because I still don't quite get it. But those are the people that are going to like show up and be like, why are my taxes looking like this? And it's going to be different for different parts of the state. And I think that I think we should set our sights on really dialing in on what that looks like for us.
And that's
So
going to be, you're talking about a totally new system.
Right. And that's going to be very hard for people to understand, because they're already working in a system that they barely understood. And then to totally shift everybody's perspective on that is going to be a very, very big pill to swallow.
I feel like the problem though is that because they're coming at it, governance and foundation formula as two separate like work paths, it's almost impossible to know what to tell people to expect until the moment it happens, because because things are changing. The foundation formula stuff is going to change, and the governance stuff is going to change. And until both sides of that equation finish up, like you can't make predictions. You have nothing to go off of. It's just absolute chaos.
Yep. Well, I've got to give Randy tons of kudos here because she's pointed out some really important things, like the potential double funding on the poverty weights. But she was also, pointed out, and I'm curious as to whether or not it was interesting. This process was going along and, as Dean said, on two different paths, the governance and the versus the foundation formula, going along and people, getting to the point of congratulating themselves for coming up with such wonderful things. And it was, very at the end of that whole process, after there was already a lot of patting on the backs and stuff like that, that they suddenly realized that, gee, low spending districts are going to get huge increases in their tax bills, and the high spending districts are not going to have the money. And this is going to go over like a lead balloon in our communities. And we haven't even thought about that. So my guess is, it's interesting because I think, particularly like on this point with the double counting on poverty, that's something that could be another aha moment in Montpelier. Um, and I think I think that could could give us a little bit of leverage on the whole idea of, gee, this isn't all that well thought out. You guys think you're a lot smarter than you are. You've missed some basic functions. So
I,
I think it's, yeah, go ahead.
Dean has pointed out that we have a bit of leverage. The example of the Title I sort of issue, with several issues needing to be resolved in order to understand what the practical implications are, is precisely the practical example that we need to keep coming up with. Because the bottom line is, not each part of this whole process is coordinated. Not each part is focused around a lens, like the Taconic and Green is focused around. We start with the individual students, and that's the lens that we measure whether or not we're doing things successfully. And the more we focus on the individual students, the more our ends policy is focused. Dean has pointed out, and I think it's absolutely right, they don't have an overall practical lens that they're looking through, so they don't develop the models based on, are we accomplishing either the monetary fiscal process or the outcomes process, or developing systems of governance that are practical and doable. I when they, for example, the district issue, we already know that we have a pretty complex three-tiered system in our supervisory union that we oversee. You add another community or four or five other communities with different ways of approaching education. How the hell is anybody going to save money on administration? And two, how is it all going to coordinate in anything that talks about educational, student centered excellence and equality? It can't happen.
Yep. Well, I think we've
So
got to,
Dean's focus, I think, is a good one.
yep,
Measure the practical outcomes. You got a district of 8,000. That 8,000 can be made up in our district. We're the core district. We got 3,000. We got to come up with 5,000 more students. And when we do that, we got to go north, we got to go east, or we got to go south in order to come up with that.
I think that in our system, it's actually, I was actually thinking today, I had a long drive today, and I was like, I would say 80% is where I landed. 80% confident that SVSU and BRSU would be combined, about 5,000. It meets the 4,000. It's two systems coming together. There might be some offshoots, whatever. I think that to Dick's point, and this is what I have said since the beginning of the session, the challenge we are going to face and the state is going to face, and people have not wanted to hear this, and it's not something that I want to be true, but I can tell you, leading a supervisory union with 3 districts, if the new supervisory union, if there's a supervisory union with 5 districts and 6 boards in order to maintain choice, you are spot on, Dick. There will be absolutely no savings from administration and supervision, because the number of administrators that are required to execute a system like that, because of all the local educational agency reps and all the schools and showing up for meetings at independent schools and public schools, is excessive. You cannot save money. The only way is if you've got a district, one district with one governance system, one business, then you can begin having some administrative efficiencies, but you won't with an SU. As a matter of fact, it's going to probably cost more. And because of the foundation formula, that you're looking at a lump of money that will then be taken away from the students in order to provide the federal and state required administrative oversight for a system that's got 6 different businesses in it. So that stinks for us, because we know our communities value choice. Our communities value access to independent schools. That, we hear all the time, this is why people move here, right? And it will not save money. And the reality is, if we are merged with SVSU, if we think of the different cultures within those communities, there are a population of folks in Bennington who feel as if folks up here in the North Shire, Manchester, Dorset, and the mountain towns, have a privilege that they don't. The idea of being able to navigate that is going to be organizationally very, very, very complex. And I'm with you, Dick. I'm going to make one more comment, because, like I said, I feel like it is a reasonable, this section of SVSU and BRSU coming together is not that far off. It may make sense, I don't know who, but for there to be some financial modeling happening between the 2 SUs, looking at the district budgets, looking at spending, it probably is worth it for us to get a sense how many title dollars do they get? What is that allocation looking like? When we know that they spend significantly less at their local budget, what does overall spending look like given what they've got? What are the resources they have for that money? What are the resources we have? It's probably worth it to do a little bit of inside work here. If I wasn't, to be honest, if I wasn't over my head right now with T&G work, I would offer to do that. And Sue's got summer coming up, but
I mean, if you weren't running your own SU?
If I wasn't running my own SU, yeah.
I mean,
anyway, just again, some more information to kind of put out there to add to this conversation.
Can I jump in really quick?
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Randy. I think what you just said is a perfect example of what I was trying to articulate before, about thinking this through to the logical conclusion. Okay, if you want to make larger districts in an attempt to save money, the only way you save money is if you combine them into districts with one governance structure, not an SU. So let's assume that that's what's going to happen, because that's what the goal of the legislation is. Okay, well then what does that look like if we were to combine with SVSU? Like, this is the conversation that should have been happening all across the state while they were designing this legislation. Like, what does this actually look like for each of these different communities all across the state? And then, okay, so let's say we are going to entertain that notion. Where are you going to house this brand new district administrative conglomerate monstrosity that is now combining to previously existing infrastructures? What's that going to cost? Because you probably don't use the same software. You probably don't use the same systems. You probably have different rules and standards and ways of doing things. And you probably don't need to keep all that staff. There's probably redundancies there. So who determines that kind of stuff? Like, I don't know. Like, maybe I'm getting too far in the weeds, but to me, that's what's going to end up making the difference as to whether or not this is a good idea or a train wreck is the details.
I think that's a wonderful idea. It's also important to keep in mind that this whole idea of, it goes back to what Dean said way back earlier in this meeting, which was it's built on a whole lot of assumptions, and many of those assumptions really have no basis in reality. And so the bigger is better sort of thing is, again, now they're talking about between 4,000 and 8,000. We only have one school district in the state right now that is roughly 4,000. And that's the district that spends 100 million now, and the foundation formula would give 80. Oops.
And that was the thing that I pointed out in my conversation with my representative. I will tell you that I highlighted that as hard as I could over and over and over again. And the annoying response was, well, how does Boston do it? Anyways,
It's a little different when you're a city or something.
little bit different.
Well, it's also, there's a difference between being somewhere and getting somewhere.
Yeah.
It's entirely possible for us to get to what they're imagining, to this hypothetical promised land of economies of scale in Vermont education. We can absolutely get there. It is going to cost an inordinate amount of money to get there. The idea, that's the pipe dream, really, is that they can get us from point A to point B and it's not going to cost anything. In fact, we're going to save money along the way. Like, that to me is the big lie, that they can do it not just for no extra cost, but actually we can save money while we're completely revamping our entire education
I think
system.
one of the tough things we need to, this morning I had a meeting. There's a VSBA executive committee with a bunch of people from school districts around the state who are mad at the VSBA for having had anything to do with H454. They basically, even though VSBA in the end, when it came to the final bill, was advocating, please do not sign, please vote no, they're still all like, you guys were all cheerleaders for this whole thing. And, the interesting thing is, I think there are going to be a lot of people, it's a very noisy group, and their focus is, the statement one of them, said in the beginning was that the whole big issue is you've got, and this is, because this is from the person who served leading up to this group, there's tension between three groups: the independent schools, just meaning the 4 academies, Chittenden County, and then rural Vermont. And they're in the rural Vermont camp saying that, so the whole problem is that we have different needs than all those other people, and they're running the show. And, unfortunately, they've got a little bit of a, there's some basis for having that viewpoint, but at the same time, a bunch of these, school board members who were talking, they were basically saying, like some of them were saying, just don't change our school districts. Do whatever you want with the SU, because maybe you can save some, this is a school board member, it's part of an SU, saying, maybe you can save money up there by merging SUs or something. Obviously has no clue what the SU is doing, but is saying that, locally, we're doing what's best for our kids. And, my guess is this is a guy for the school district with, schools with 100 kids in it or something. So we have to realize that, we've got competing competing folks here, but, you know, I think those, from the standpoint of the governance changes, those people will be presenting to their, I think, you know, they're gonna have a very different argument than we are with the legislators and with the redistricting committee, that they're gonna have, but they're gonna be pushing in the same direction we are, somewhat, but not necessarily, but, you know, but they're gonna be, you know, there are gonna be a lot of people who are getting noisy about the problems with this.
I also, I'm hesitant to say this, but I am going to say it anyway. Dean is spot on. Julie is, like, we have talked about the lack of clarity about why we are proposing, why education reform, really public education reform, is being discussed in Vermont, right? It is, the whole purpose is to stabilize spending and make sure every one of our kids has access to strong, solid opportunities and effective outcomes. And we are seeing results, right? We are providing a strong education to our kids at a cost that is not crushing our taxpayers. But the decision-making involved in this legislation was not focusing on those two things. So what happens is there are, from what I'm understanding, folks fighting to maintain what they have while not needing either of those now.
Right.
But we aren't talking about that, right? Because in Vermont, we don't talk about that a lot. So it's okay to fight to preserve something, even if your students aren't prepared for what's happening next. And receiving districts and schools will say, wow, when we get kids from here, they need a lot of support, with a board that isn't identifying or recognizing that. Like, we're not having the right conversations to make good decisions upon. And I think that, ironically, forget all the stuff at the state. Right now, that's really the work we're trying to do in Taconic and Green, right? Is saying, we realize that our system, our structure right now is not providing the outcomes we want. We understand we're not able to provide the opportunities for our kids that we believe all kids should have access to. We're really doing the hard work to try to say, how can we move forward to ensuring that all of our kids have access to what middle schoolers should have and elementary students should have access to? And, you know, the big thing is, how do we continue to stay focused on those things when there's a million red herrings all over the place, including what's happening at the
We
state?
recognize our structure is a barrier to accomplishing that. Right
It
now.
is, it is.
That's other people, that's where I always come down with the, you know, a bunch of these school board members, they keep on, you know, sort of wanting to say, you know, I get the impression that you're much more concerned about how it's going to affect your school board than you are with how it's going to affect your kids. Yeah.
Julie has her hand up.
I just, well, your last sentence, Jim, I mean, that's the banner I've been waving all along, that we've been focusing on community and school boards and not kids. And it's disturbing. But the other thing that I really want to highlight is, I think that this all highlights a complete and total lack of clarity on the difference between an SU and an SD. And I think it is from people that operate in a big SD, don't understand what our system is like. They don't understand that we are that BRSU is like four different entities.
Businesses.
And I don't think our legislators completely understand that. And I think that's why you get the comments like, why can they do it in Boston? Because there's no understanding that if they did this structure in Boston, it would be it would be the same that we're going through, but like times 10, right? Because you'd have each block would have a different school and a different school district, and none of it would make sense. And I actually think that this is maybe a good idea for us to like figure out a way to educate our public about this important difference quickly, so that as we go through this summer of all of these meetings and potential ideas coming together, that people can really understand what we're talking about.
I think this meeting already has been hugely helpful for me. I think a lot of good stuff is coming out, including starting to maybe form some ideas about how we do sort of plan for and you know, I think we need to figure out what sort of battles we want to fight and what our message is going to be, and understand what the rest of the. My guess is it'd be interesting again, because there were about a dozen school board members from around the state on this morning, and for the most part, they were all part of. There's this effort, the Rural School Alliance, that has uh, been sort of, VSBA has been under some fire because folks are saying, you're not representing us. And we put together this group of just a bunch of board members and all, that is the Rural School Alliance. And basically their primary argument, they were mad at the VSBA whenever the VSBA said that, when we're essentially trying to help form H454 in the House Education Committee when it was start getting developed, and giving testimony, DSA, VSBA, giving testimony there to kind of try to shape what it would look like. And the Rural School Alliance, their basic message was, don't change anything. Anything you do is going to close down our small schools and make our districts go away. And so do you want to continue paying dues to like the VSBA when they're in support of things that could make your school and your school board go away? And they're still making those arguments. They're going to continue to make those arguments, but I think I don't think that's a very winning argument, but I think we do have some winning arguments on our side where we can have some impact. But it's gonna take some real. What I kind of propose is, start to try to put some outlines together of things we might do, and then continue to brainstorm that. That makes sense to folks.
I think that makes sense. And again, I want to reiterate my earlier point about like maybe calling another Thursday
Bingo.
session
Yes.
to highlight some of these things and really hit the ground running.
And I agree.
Those we had throughout the year the Thursday night standing meeting at 7 p.m. for talk about what was going on in the legislature.
I can do
Okay, and I think we'll it's time to. So that was again representing all of our districts where it was sort of I was
Jeff,
on it. Yeah, go ahead.
I was wondering, since we had a practical example that would surface if the Southwest Supervisory Union and the Taconic and the BRSU
Yep.
were merged,
SVSU and BRC together. Yep.
why not reach out to that board chair of that supervisory union and begin the same kind of questions, not predicting what the lines would be, but to actually begin to work on what are some of the objectives, what kinds of problems would immediately introduce themselves. I don't think figuring out what they would be would be too hard, but rather than have superintendent to superintendent, let's get
Well, we
the
had we had a good meeting with those guys. That was basically the Arlington folks, but, you know, they're part of SVSU. We have kind of, that's our way in, I think. They have, of course, they're changing superintendents down there.
I mean, I can get copies of budgets. That's not hard for me to grab.
But I was saying the reach out would be to
Board.
board the board. If this is where the legislature is going, this is a logical way of putting together our whole sorts of things. What are some of the immediate community-based concerns creating massive problems and disagreement, all of which needs to be solved in
Well, I think
order
that
for
going that route of trying to figure out what they would look like together is important, but I think we don't want to, we just, I think all we need is back of the envelope
Right.
for that.
Agreed.
You know,
Okay.
'cause
Agreed.
if we did it, we don't want to get in too deep, and I don't think we'll need to.
I actually think it's a great framework for discussing this topic, and I'm really glad that Randy mentioned it, and
Yep.
also the issue with the enrollment, right? So you mentioned earlier, Jim, that like about reaching out to more legislators. So the way I see it, we're kind of steel manning their argument by talking about SVSU and BRSU. We're basically saying, okay, you want big districts, you want to save money. Here's a great one. Here's the best one we could come up with. And here are all of the problems, the really practical problems with that, the best version of what you're talking about. Like,
Right.
we're going to give you the benefit of the doubt. Like, let's just pretend that this is going to work. And we're going to give you the best possible circumstances for how this is going to play out. And then we're going to go line by line and talk about all of the practical issues that arise from this. That puts us in a really strong position when we're arguing our case. We're like, no. We're not saying the best possible scenario for us. We're saying in your best case, the best idea that you could possibly come up with, you still have all these problems you haven't addressed yet. So I mean, if we're going to talk to legislators and we're going to start to frame this in a way that gives us leverage to make some change, I think that's the absolute strongest way to make that argument.
Yep, I think we have some homework to do. We'll start the Thursday meetings again and try to push this forward, you know, figure
Yep.
out how to make it a good argument.
The only other question I have on this then is Randy is running an SU and we expect her to run our SU well. And Sue is very busy and all of our people are very busy. So what can we do to facilitate some of this groundwork? Because I'm not an expert in this and I don't want to pretend to be. I can do what I can do. Jim, you're excellent at what you do, and you can do what you can do. Mel's excellent. Dean's excellent. Like all of us have our strong suits, but to put all of this information together and come up with this cohesive argument, what do we need to do as a board to get this done?
Well, I think part of that is, you know, you're pointing out. I think we all know that we have limits and we can't do it. You know, we need the pros, but I think we have to have an absolute understanding that it's got to be an extremely simplified. We just if we make it, you know, we're not doing pro forma financials here. We're essentially just, okay, if we did it, then let's kick around what are some of the issues and try to make it clear, because, you know, we can't afford to take all that effort, and I think it would be wasted anyway.
The board we're going to join has its experts and its understanding, and all we need to do is begin to set up dialogue, much as we have with the 3-part or whatever number part Thursday night group. It's some discussion. Dean surfaced very quickly some major concerns about what the Taconic and Green and Meadowy and Wyndham reaction and working with um, the various boards and the communities within which they exist. We don't have to come up with where the problems are. All we have to do is say we could create a practical model if we all came together and a board member looked at the finances. A board member looked at the difference, the inherent differences within our own little SU, and and just add them into the
I think,
mix.
Can I just ask Sue a
yeah,
question?
please.
So I think, yeah, I think we can do some really high level stuff. Sue, I don't know the answer to this. Do you know whether or not there's like a state list by SU of title of CFP allocations that we can have access to?
I think there might be. I know there's one for IDEA because I was just looking at it today. I don't usually pay attention to them, but I'll look and see if something came out.
Yeah, because I think I am actually really curious if we look at, the lowest 10 spending local budget, lowest spending districts in the state, how does that correlate with the CFP allocation? I'm just really curious. And I feel like
Yeah, and I'd throw IDEA into that.
You would?
Well, I mean, if they're talking about spending, special ed is part of it, right? Like, yeah, we may get some
Yes.
reimbursement, but it's not fully covered.
Right.
And IDEA is a big chunk of change. So
Yeah.
I don't know why you would. I mean, it doesn't correlate necessarily to what you're talking about with the poverty count, but
No, right. It would be
it's
different.
still spending.
I am just curious. Like, I think about Addison County being the biggest, the county that sort of loses the most financially. And I think that their poverty rate is much lower than a lot of other places. And so they are probably spending more locally to provide similar services than other more economically disadvantaged communities are needing to spend because they have all these federal funds to support their education
Yeah.
programs. So I don't know. So yeah, I don't, if it's not a big ask, otherwise I can give it to Skylar and ask him to figure it out.
No,
If
no,
there's a list, it would
if
be helpful for us to see that.
But I think
if they
it's,
provide a list to us, I would have it.
Okay, thank you.
but kind of just on that end, out of the 119 school districts in the state, 26 of those school districts would be seeing increased spending of an excess of 15%,
Right.
which again, it's
Current
just,
districts.
and current districts. And you would have 6 of those districts seeing an increase in excess of 30%. There's no way that those people could be educating their kids for that little money without it being made up someplace else.
I agree. But the question is, how strong is that correlation, right? So once we get this additional information, it will help us to move this conversation and discussion along. It will kind of anchor, I think, some of those key points. I think it's important, whatever the advocacy is that we're doing, we want it to be an issue that affects the most people, right? Not just us, although some of it will for sure only be us, but the more that we can get that has some teeth that affect a significant population.
But I think if we take this in a couple of different directions, it's one, we're not trying to say no to everything, but we
Right,
are
I
trying to
agree.
say, on the foundation formula, we've noticed some things that we think are just as significant as when you said, oh, we didn't figure out what tax changes were gonna be for different towns.
Right.
This is gonna be an aha moment, and honestly,
Maybe.
one that probably should have happened with 127 as well, with Act 127. But I think, the foundation formula, we have something that could get a lot of attention. As long as we're getting attention, then if we can also throw, it's the likelihood as you try to put together, SVSU and BRSU. And if you did that back of the envelope, what do you think the result's gonna be? Well, back of the envelope, not what you expect.
Mhm.
So,
Or what parts of it will be for sure what we expect, but let's dive into it a
but
little
we're
bit.
gonna,
Yeah.
I think if we figure out, a couple of different, I think, along with, again, Dean's point on, you've got a lot of assumptions that are going here. Let's look at some of those assumptions, look at how they play out in real life. I think if we can do that just with, we pick our best arguments too to go out with, because
Right.
we don't want to be trying to make 15 arguments. We just want to, do the things that are actually going to get people's attention and make it clear that more thought is required.
Agreed.
Okay, I think this has been really helpful. I appreciate everybody's, input and thought. As always, we have good board members and good district here.
As usual, Jim, thank you for summarizing what it took me 20 minutes to rant about in one sentence.
Now, I can rant with the best of them. And can go on and on and on and on. And speaking of that, so I guess that's the end of our VSBA legislative updates.
The reflection on norms, we have a couple of new norms. And I think if anybody has any reflections, feel free.
I just want to thank you guys all for being amenable to this idea. It felt important to me.
Yep, absolutely. No, it is. We were, our norms were just talking about running a meeting, and that's not all we're about. Okay, public comment, no public. Next meeting date, August 25th. I think that if we are making some good progress on some arguments and all, obviously we're going to want to be quite a ways along well before August 25th. So we'll just be keeping people informed as we come up with useful ideas, and make sure that we really appreciate everybody's input and thought, and it's again, it's a really good team around here. So we've been those Thursday night sessions. I've apologized a few times that I don't want it to be like, oh, we're just having our little group go off and do it and all, but it's been phenomenally productive. And so, I really appreciate the people who've been willing to make the time, and it hasn't always been easy. Okay, so one last motion. Dick, you're on mute, otherwise you'd have it.
Move for adjournment.
Is there a second? Okay, Dean.
All in favor, raise your hand. Okay, thanks everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.